So good afternoon. A few of our managed service provider partners and clients have asked us about creating a video on using ring fencing as the default policy. So just to go into this in a little bit more detail first, the way we recommend customers deploy ThreatLocker is to first of all make sure no software can run that isn't explicitly trusted. So when you first deploy ThreatLocker, it will go through a learning stage where it will catalog all of the software on your computer, and it will create policies to make sure that software is going to be allowed. And then at the very bottom of the list, we have this concept of a default policy that by default is configured to deny anything that isn't on the whitelist above it. Now, some of our service providers have asked us, they've got specifically difficult customers or groups of users who aren't willing to accept the concept of not being able to run new software without requesting permission first. So they wanted to say, well, how can we protect ourselves from getting ransomware or that other software potentially accessing our files without blocking it from running? So what we typically recommend is that you just do not allow it to run, and the software that you do allow to run, you set policies around it to define what that software can do. So, for example, we allow Google Chrome to run, but we're not going to allow Google Chrome to access our file system for our protected files. But what we can essentially do is say, in addition to the list of software that's been profiled, instead of denying any new software, we're just going to allow it to run. So we'll permit it, but we're going to enable advanced ring fencing on it. What this allows us to do is then say, well, that new software isn't allowed to interact with other applications. So you could say that it's not allowed to call PowerShell, it's not allowed to call Office, it's not allowed to access our file system, to make changes to our registry, or even access the internet. I'm going to focus on two areas now because these are the areas that are probably most important. The first one is protecting the file system from any untrusted software. So in this case, what we would do is we just, instead of saying deny, we'd say permit the execution, ring fence the application, but enable ring fencing to protect access to files, and equally restrict these applications from accessing the internet except where below. And we can always create exceptions into here as well. The next thing is I'm just going to go and save that, and I'm going to deploy policies. So now if I download and install new software, that software should be permitted, but shouldn't be able to access my file system, or certainly protected areas of my file system, or the internet. So I'm going to quickly go into what a protective area system of the file system is. I did do it on a previous video, but just for those who don't already know, the way the ThreatLocker storage control works is we define policies around what external storage devices can be used, but also what internal and local storage devices can be used. By default, all external file storage is considered protected. That doesn't mean it's necessarily blocked or permitted. What that means is, first of all, any files that are accessed on that are going to be accessible and audited in the unified audit. But in addition to that, you can also choose to protect file shares and local folders on your hard drive. And you can do that one of two ways. Simply, one is by creating a policy. So I have a policy here that defines my desktop folder that says any files on my desktop that match this extension cannot be changed or written to, or you can't write any files that match this extension on my desktop. By having that policy in place, that makes this file system, this desktop folder with these file extensions, a protected file system, which means regardless of whether this policy says deny or not, simply by having a policy in place, it's now going to take effect onto the ring fencing. The next part of it is what I've done here as well, is I've just put an audit policy in for all my important assets. And I've just put a couple of samples in here. But typically what you want to put in here is your file shares, any documents folders on your C drive, anywhere that people are storing data on local drives, but also maybe system folders like the System32 drivers, etc., where the host file might be targeted, or startup folders and things like that. And even by putting a permit read and write policy in place, this effectively says that this is now a monitored asset, which means when you have ring fencing enabled, whether it's at a default policy level or whether it's for all applications, that those applications are not going to be able to access these parts of the system. So I'm just going to deploy policies now, and I'm going to go and download and install Notepad++. Because I don't have that, there is no explicit policy, so that's going to hit the default policy. So you can see how this works. It's taking its time. Okay, so apparently Notepad++ is down at the moment, but I do have a copy of it downloaded anyway. So I'm just going to run this installer and install this software, and everything that happens in this is considered to hit the default policy because it's not, there is no policy for Notepad++ already. Might as well run this. And we can see now when I go into the audit that so we can see here now, we should be able to see that Notepad++ opened under the default policy because there was no policy explicitly for it. So we can see it hit the default policy, so it should be ring fenced. So if we now go into this and we try and browse any protected area of the file system and open any files, the local host is actually a storage policy that's causing that pop up. But if we were to say, go to my documents folder and try and open something, we can see that this is denied because it doesn't have permission to access these files. Likewise, if it tries to access any of our file shares, the same document is denied. If Notepad++ was to try and go out to the internet to download a payload, upload data, equally the same principle is going to apply. So when we click here to try and update it, it gives us a denied. And we should be able to see in the audit here, if we look for any denies, and we can actually say the process is Notepad++. We can actually see that Notepad++ tried to open these files, tried to read these files, and it was actually denied. Equally, it tried to go out to the internet, and that was denied as well through the ring fencing policy. Now, we don't have to deny access to the internet. We don't have to deny access to the file system, but these are some of the top areas where you may be able to harden your system even if you don't want to use the full whitelisting package. Now, once again, I want to say we do recommend that you don't just rely on ring fencing. It is better to make sure nothing that isn't trusted can run, and then when something is running, to control what it can do. But if you are in an environment where you don't have the ability or don't have the luxury to stop applications from running, you can edit the default policy to at least stop those applications from accessing your file servers, from accessing your protected documents, and potentially protect yourself from ransomware attacks and other likewise attacks. Again, if you didn't want to block access to the internet, but you did want to stop TCP/IP traffic on your network, you could potentially just say, well, I'm going to allow access to the internet under the default policy. I'm going to monitor it, but I'm going to allow it. But what I'm going to do is anything on my 192.168 network, I'm going to actually deny. So in this case, it would be able to go off to the public web, but wouldn't be able to talk to anything else on your network, potentially stopping the spread of ransomware and viruses as well, if somebody does run this. If anyone has any additional questions around this or would like to learn more about how the ring fencing, whether as a default policy or in conjunction with the whitelisting, can really help protect you from zero-day threats, please reach out to me or reach out to us at ThreatLocker. Thank you very much for your time.